Welcome back to Time Travel Timeline Thursdays. This is where we step outside the headlines and look at decision points past, present, and future. The future is not fate. It is shaped by choices, leadership, restraint, and courage. And today we are asking not just what could happen, but what would create the strongest possible outcome. I'm Annabelle. I'm a tarot practitioner and psychic for over 35 years. This is something I do every single day for my private clients. And if you would like your own magical reading or just a bit of direction, you can see the links in the description and on my about page. You can also visit my website at fortunecookiestarot.com for scheduling links. So on with today's video right after this. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So this is part 2 of our Advice to King Charles series from the Beyond. So much fun. If you haven't seen The Ruthless Kings part 1, go on back. If you're one of the members and you're watching this before it launches, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that you're members. We did consult with the rulers who ruled through force, discipline, and consolidation. We talked with Genghis Khan. We talked with Ivan the Terrible. We also talked with Shaka Zulu, which was a fun addition for me. I did not know a whole lot about Shaka Zulu. I knew just enough to scratch the surface. And I thought that the insights that we got from that chief was amazing. So if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. Power is not always lost through weakness. Sometimes it's surrendered and sometimes it's mismanaged. And sometimes we don't even realize that power is slipping out of our hands. Today, we're going to convene with some cautionary monarchs, the monarchs that hesitated, abdicated, miscalculated, or lost control of the narratives. And we're going to kick it off with Edward VIII. We've been talking about him a lot just because of the whole Megxit thing and the growing conversation about King Charles possibly abdicating from the role, or the call for an abdication, which may or may not lead to a republic. So let's talk a little bit about Edward VIII. I'm going to bring up the card in Lenormand view. So if you haven't hit that like button yet, go ahead and hit it. I'm going to get a little bit of a history lesson here, guys. So I know a lot of us, we've been talking about him. So Edward VIII, born in 1894, he became king in 1936, just as World War II was about to kick off. He abdicated I think I said 1936. He abdicated in December of 1936 after 325 days of being king. And the reason for that, we all know, he chose to marry the twice divorced Wallis Simpson, the American divorcee. He delivered an abdication speech. I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love. Sounds a lot like Prince Harry. Can't do it without my love. He lived the remainder of his life in exile, socially, politically, as the Duke of Windsor. Accusations of his questionable associations during World War II were brewing at the time, and now give us a very different scope of him, because it does seem that he was a bit suckered by some of the propaganda. His leadership principle, as scant as it is, when a monarch leaves the role, the institution moves on without them. Very, very important role for those that participated in a Megxit. And the advisory theme is, once you step outside the structure, you do not control the script. So therefore, Edward may caution that public sympathy fades. The crown does not chase those who leave. There are very few visits to him. Famously, King Charles was there at one point when he was the Prince of Wales. Reintegration is rare, is something that Edward VIII, I think later the Duke of Windsor, would have said. So let's see what he would advise to King Charles about Harry specifically, because, and I want to zero in on Harry because Harry left the firm. He left the institution. So what does he advise King Charles about his son who ran away from duty? And we're using the Lenormand here. So the marriage was a burden, and this is wild. The burden is marriage for Harry. And I do think that Edward understands that, or David, the Duke of Windsor, understands that better than anyone else, because the heart wanted what the heart wanted with Wallis Simpson. He threw it all away. He gave up a crown to be with a woman who didn't necessarily want to marry him, and then had to marry him because he gave up the crown. Like, what a circumstance to be in. Here, the heart is sacrosanct. So while he says that the marriage is Harry's burden, the marriage is the spiky stick that's going to keep poking Harry in the side, and the monarch and King Charles himself, that the heart is all of the wealth that Harry has, and this isolates him from everyone, and that he did the same. The blessing is the cutting off. And in this sense, I do think he says that Harry was never going to stay anyway. And this particular exit was a gift to his reign. It was a gift. So I just want to pull some clarifiers on this. The burden was the blessing was the leaving. Yes, separation. But why? What does he see? Harry would have been very unhappy at home. He would have created inflammatory situations that they couldn't get out of. And this I know because this I know, he says. So I do think that we would have seen more public relations crises along with Harry remaining in the institution. I think that that is the message that he sends. Also, the public business of giving, that is so what he says is that Harry is always going to gift people, and I'm laughing because of a piece in Spare. He's saying that Harry would always be generous with your goodwill and goods and your things. Harry would always be generous with that. And if you've read Spare, and if you haven't, just go over to Chair Denise, and she has done a whole review of the book. Her Harry voice is hilarious. Go over there and watch it. You don't have to buy a copy, but you can always go to Thrift Books and buy a copy. So in the book, Harry, when they are writing the announcement for Megxit with the staff, who apparently is like falling asleep and crying, and it's a pretty dramatic scene, Harry goes over to the Christmas tree and pulls off one of the ornaments. This is in one of the royal castles. Pulls off one of the ornaments or some of the ornaments and starts handing them out as gifts, starts giving them as gifts to the individuals that are helping them leave that exact institution. So Harry is very generous with the gifts and the blessings of the institution, but not of himself. The only thing he has is to steal from his family and pass those on. So he's always going to be borrowing from the royal family, whether that's for clout or actual wealth, he's always going to be borrowing from them. And that is what David, Duke of Windsor, is conveying to Charles, that, this is something, this is an individual that is always going to be trying to grasp on to the royal family. So can separation coexist? Professional separation, can it coexist with Charles being a father? And I'm going back to the This May Hurt tarot, because I think this may hurt. Can Charles continue to be a father and professionally depart from Harry? What does David think? The Wheel of Fortune, the Queen of Wands. It's a tricky thing because there's a lot. Nine of Cups. I don't think so. Temperance. So, and the Fool. Every time Charles sends a gift, every time Charles sends money, there's another invoice that comes behind it. So if he sends a gift to his grandchildren, there's an expectation of something else. It's a very strange kind of exchange here. And I think that David, as the Duke of Windsor, I think David understands that better than anyone. There were some difficulties. Apparently David stiffed a lot of vendors for bills. Like they would go into places and they would pick up, clothing, goods, whatever, food, and then they just wouldn't pay the bill. They just wouldn't pay it. So I think that he is saying that's a potential, as long as he is kind to Harry, King Charles, as long as he is kind to Harry and maintains that relationship, even a personal relationship, he's going to wind up getting bills for other professional ventures that Harry may be doing, and that perhaps it is best to allow his son to exile. What does David advise King Charles as far as his son's exile? Self-imposed exile. So the wise voices about the mice in the mix, and we've already talked about the mice in Lenormand in part 1. This is the little things that nibble away and erode and wreck the institution. The voices about those mice are accurate. They're accurate. Over here, Charles has to throw out the book on parenting that he is currently working from. He is failing. David wants him to know, Duke of Windsor wants him to know that he's failing to see Harry as an adult, and that he still sees him as a wayward child, like a teenager. I get this because my parents, every time I tell them my age, they're freaked out by it. My dad especially. He's like, how'd you get so old? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've just been walking around here for 54 years. So the anchor is the anchor. And I think that this is curious because that is really, you bought your tickets. Now you got to ride the ride. Once, and that's something that I'm seeing. David's like, it's a one-way door. You can't just breeze out and then breeze back in. You're tainted by the public. You are afflicted by being a part of the public. But he does think that the woman, his children, and the family are Harry's best gift. And he says, let him have it. Let him have it. Let him have it. So what about King Charles' long-term legacy? David's legacy is growing more and more tarnished without all those courtiers and palace workers to come over and polish it up. It is growing more and more tarnished as we get further and further away from his brief reign and the marriage and his death. As we get further and further away, we find more and more out about him and the association with that German government, and what he would have done had he been still monarch during their heyday, during their high point. So what does he advise King Charles about his long-term legacy and public memory? What does he advise? Four of Wands. It's an unhappy house. 10 of Wands. 10 of Pentacles. Oof. And the Chariot. David advises that the legacy is set, and the legacy is more you are a bad family man than you are a bad leader. That his family life, much like Uncle David's, is eclipsing any of the good work that he's doing as a monarch. So that is what David is saying, that, you know, you look like a messy dad, unfortunately. And I do think that that's unfortunate, because I think that he was bagged on quite badly in Spare. Harry really did try to frame him as a negligent or distracted father. And I think that that was a premise that he took from King Charles rearing with Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth was busy queening. And it wasn't until, you know, with Charles and Anne, they really had a more hands-off kind of parenting, rather than Andrew and Edward, who followed up. She was a bit more hands-on with them. You have to remember, times were very different. Monarchs did not raise their children. They did not nurse their children. We'll talk in a minute about Nicholas II, but Alexandra, the Empress Alexandra, was roundly criticized for nursing her children. She did not want a wet nurse. She wanted to do it all herself. And I applaud that for her. That is showing a level of dedication that I do think was criticized within the Russian social circles, was gossiped about, because it was kind of lowly and like gross, but certainly it's not gross. So, but I think that David does warn King Charles that his legacy is somewhat endangered by his legacy as a father and as a family man, which is very interesting. I did not expect that to happen. So now David, having abdicated, does he advise soft regency, abdication, or ride it till the wheels fall off? Soft regency with William, abdication, and ride it till the wheels fall off. Soft regency, abdication, ride it till the wheels fall off. David says, stick it out, man. Did not expect that. He's warm to the soft regency. He's warm to that, but he says, ride it until the wheels fall off, because otherwise you are going to disrupt that flow of the Mountbatten Windsor royal legacy. So interesting. Let me know what you think of David's advice here. One last question for David. David, do you regret abdicating? Do you regret it? One card. Devil in reverse. Not a bit. Not a bit. He got to spend the rest of his days with the woman that he loved. So we are going to move on to someone who got to see the end of days with the woman that he loved. Louis XVI, 1554 to 1754 to 1793. Obviously born in 1754, became King of France in 1774. Very, very young age, very young monarch. Clearly had the lovely Marie Antoinette as a bride. He faced massive national debt and public unrest. Called the Estates General in 1789, unintentionally triggering the revolution. So he attempted to flee France in 1791, but was caught and executed by a guillotine in January of 1793. So his leadership principles: indecision in crisis invites revolution. Louis was not cruel. He was hesitant. And this is personal editorial, I do think that he had an attitude of, that's preposterous. That would never happen. That can't happen. We're too big to fail. His failure to act decisively allowed the public narrative to overtake whatever he was doing. So there was a lot of speculation. Again, we heard a lot of rumors. Let them eat cake is not something that Marie Antoinette said. She did not say it. It is a bastardized comment that she had made. But the public narrative, we unfortunately didn't have the same speed of media and information that we have today. So stories and fictionalized histories of people were allowed to foment in the restaurants and pubs and cafes all over France. And so those stories would grow and grow and grow. We all played telephone as kids. We know what happens. And that public narrative can get out of control, overtake a monarch, overtake the throne. So public advisory theme is public opinion is a force. So he might warn things like, don't underestimate media momentum or public sentiment momentum. Silence without strategy breeds speculation. Like I said, in those cafes and pubs, that they are going to be talking. People are going to be spinning stories, and they're going to be extemporizing on some truth to the extent where when it gets a few hands down, it becomes an untruth. Perception becomes reality in unstable times. Very, very important thing to understand. And we did see this recently with King Charles honoring Islamic traditions and Muslimism. And a lot of people were asking me to divine whether he had converted to Islam. I don't think that he did. I think he's really trying to be very even-handed about representing all of the cultures that are on British soil to this day. So what does Louis advise King Charles in terms of the shifting public sentiment? We're going to go to the Lenormand dice first. So we have the clover with the snake, the bear with the tower, the mouse with the house. We have the sun with the clouds. We have the lady with the tree. We have fish and coffin with the public, with the garden. So public sentiment shifting. I have to start at the further end here because we have the public here. And the public, the royal family, the sentiment, the opinions of the institution will be enriched by changing of the guard. Louis is saying that shifting the power structure over to another, I'm not saying the Prince of Wales, but I'm saying another, makes a lot of sense to Louis. Over here, the accident of birth. And someone gave me a hard time about that term in one of my other readings in the comments. And I don't know if they're familiar with it, but it is a term that we use in academic circles, the accident of birth. they were like, oh, you know, like it's not accidental. There's a succession. And I can't even remember what the whole thing was. But the accident of birth is how kings, princes, queens, princesses are made. We don't, you know, according to tradition, the Russian imperial line, the God imbues the family with a leader. But we see from history that not all of those leaders are great. So it is the accident of birth that gives power in monastic structures, in imperial structures. And this is not always a good thing. The luck of the draw, the luck of that one little ovum getting picked by the spermatozoa flying up the fallopian tube, it's not always a good thing. And sometimes we have to recognize that a bad leader is a bad leader or a not suitable leader. So here, I do think that Louis says, you know, we're not all cut out for this job. Like maybe you need to do a little self-examination, or maybe you need to look at some of the other individuals that are participating in this. Power elevates. Power isolates, and it puts people apart from those voices. So getting down in the muck and listening to individuals doing the walkabouts. The Prince and Princess of Wales were in Wales for St. David's Day, and it was pouring rain, and they actually were late to an event by about 50 minutes to an hour because they did an impromptu walkabout because there were so many people out there calling for them and they wanted to talk to them. And so they went out there with their umbrellas and they mixed it up with the crowd. Is that dangerous in this kind of climate? I agree, it is. I don't think it's the greatest decision. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on, especially with the happenings in the Middle East. We are now seeing domestic attacks here in the United States. Also, there were some incidents that happened in the United Kingdom as well. So I think, you know, an abundance of caution is necessary for the royals that are out there and mixing with the crowd. However, Louis XVI does tell us that having your finger on that pulse, knowing what the public is saying, and making sure that your actions demonstrate the contrary to the worst things that they're saying is really key, because the mice are already in the house. The mice are already tearing down the house, and the sunny days are coming to cloud cover. We're seeing some of the cloud cover. He needs to lean in to the favorites. Now we all know who the favorite lady is. Like, you know, I know we all love Anne. I know we love the Princess Royal, but there is nothing fresher and more exhilarating than Catherine, the Princess of Wales. You know, she is just a delight. You can see that look on the children's faces when they meet her, when they greet her. On that walkabout in Wales, there's one little girl that goes up and just spontaneously hugs the Princess of Wales. Again, security breach here, but she was a child. That little girl just hung on to her. And I actually put in Sue Smith's comments, I said, that little girl was all of us. Like, wouldn't we all just like want to run up and like hug her? You know, she just seems so genuine and so interested in making the lives of people better and enriched, and hearing the trials and tribulations and the struggles that individuals have. And Louis says, lean into that. All the more so because he had a wife who was criticized by the public for being young, beautiful, and lovely. They too were a very young monarch pairing when they came to power. They were very young and there was an excitement around them. Why wouldn't there be? So a lot of attention paid to their production too, to the children that they produced. So I do think that Louis says, you know, play to your strengths. Play to your strengths. What narrative does Louis think King Charles needs to manage the best or the most? What is the most pressing? What narrative? The 9 of Wands, disclosure. And a clear demonstration of I am in power. The public in the United Kingdom is screaming for Charles to act, whether it was with Andrew or William or Harry or the migrant situation or his relationship with the prime ministers that he's been with. The revolving door at 10 Downing. I know there was a revolving door there for a little while. But Louis XVI says you must step out from behind the protective shield and show that you are a strong king. More than less, we hear that Charles is a weak king. He is a weak king. He is a weak king. Louis says, show that you are stronger. These calls were made for me as well. So what will happen if this remains unchecked? That people will forever be looking backward to those monarchs that appealed to them. And since she is the last monarch in our collective memory, it's Queen Elizabeth II. I hate to say it, but I agree with Louis XVI on this one, that forever his reign is going to be compared to his mother's. And I think it's unfair. It's chalk and cheese here because the concept of monarchy is waning. So unfortunately, that's something that he does have to contend with. And so Louis says, if we can breathe life back into the monarchy, and that solution is to pass the torch, perhaps we allow another to build that legacy better. Perhaps that's what we do. What would restore national or institutional confidence, not national, but institutional. So he does have to recognize and advise that this is not the monarchy that the public is used to, that this is not the institution that everyone wants. Everyone wants, Queen Elizabeth Part 2, but the institution is changing and aging. And this is like having an old wooden ship. We love her. She's romantic. She's beautiful. The sails are unfurled and we're sailing across the seas into a glorious adventure. But unfortunately, the wood is old. We may have some termites there. Certainly have some mice or rats on board. And there is a better mechanism to move to that great dawn. And I do think that Louis says, in order for the institution to continue, that we have to acknowledge that this is not a recognized institution any longer, and that everyone just has to be a little bit patient with this particular reign, because we are going to bring in a very different reign with the next monarch. So continuity is definitely key here for Louis XVI, because we know that the continuity of that French crown stopped short. And with that, I have another imperial emperor whose reign stopped short. And if you've been a fan of this channel for a while, you know he has my heart. Nicholas II. He's the last Tsar of Russia. He was born in 1868 and was executed assassinated in 1918. He became czar in 1894 after a short illness with his father. Famously, he said when he was advised that his father had passed, he said to his fiancée, Alexandra, Alex of Hesse, later the Empress Alexandra, he said, "We are too young to rule." He was absolutely devastated. His father was a great and powerful ruler, a big hulking man, and was incredibly strong in his rule, whereas Nicholas was quite sensitive and quite curious and was really better suited to be a gentleman farmer, which is what he wanted after the revolution. Didn't happen. He oversaw disastrous military campaigns during the First World War and relied heavily on Rasputin, the Tsarets, who was treating his son spiritually for the hemophilia that was brought into the family line through Alex of Hesse, Empress Alexandra. She was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. So she blamed herself for that. Absolutely. Again, we have a situation where that malady was kept secret and the public fomented storylines about the relationship between Rasputin and the Empress and the Grand Duchesses, the daughters. There was a lot of speculation about that because Rasputin was a bit of a rascal when he was in his cups and he was running around and, he was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So I still don't know who Rasputin is in our modern world, but Rasputin was taken off the earth plane by some relatives of Nicholas II in an effort to preserve and protect the Tsar and the Tsarina, Empress Alexandra, from their own foolishness and foolish spirituality. Nicholas II abdicated on March 17th in favor of his son once he was advised that he would be separated from Alexei. He changed the abdication in favor of his brother, who was in exile. His brother had married without the Tsar's consent and was thus exiled, but brought back into favor. And Mikhail had also refused the position of Tsar or the suggestion of being Tsar. He too was executed during the revolution. Nicholas II, as you all, I'm sure, know, if you've been a fan of this channel, was executed with the entire family and the retained retinue that they had. There was a doctor, a couple of ladies in waiting, a cook, some people that were there. So his leadership principle for Nicholas II: isolation and poor advisors will weaken legitimacy. Nicholas believed loyalty to his family and faith in God would shield him from anything that would happen negatively. Keep in mind that the concept of Tsar and the succession in Russia at the time was much more closely affiliated with a conduit to God. It's the best way I can describe it. The populace, the peasants, the people of Russia would pray to the Tsar to pray to God on their behalf. They truly thought that having counsel with the Tsar would pray to God and it would resolve. God, the Tsar would speak to God on their behalf. So that loyalty and that faith in God did not shield him from ultimately being murdered. So advisory theme is don't allow external influence to erode your credibility. And he may caution King Charles that appearances matter, advisors shape perception. Public trust, once broken, is impossible, if not difficult, if not impossible, to restore. So let's see what Nicholas has to say about Charles. And I do think that they are very similar in terms of their sentimentality. I've always gotten that about Charles, and it's always made me a little bit nervous because Nicholas II was a romantic. That you can read the letters that he and the Empress shared when they were younger, before they were married, and even after they were married. You can read them. And they truly are one of the great love stories of our modern age. Truly a pair that adored each other. So there's something to be said in a man who loves a woman to the ends of the earth. It's one of the reasons that the family did perish together, because Nicholas and Alex did not want them separated. There was a brief separation during their imprisonment, and they were very, very torn by that. And that was due to Alexei being injured from an incident, and they could not move him. So they took one of the daughters with them, and they left the rest of the daughters back with Alexei to care for him. And I cannot imagine that they weren't a nervous wreck, because they were under arrest at that time. So let's talk about Nicholas II, his advice to King Charles on the influence of his image right now. What would he advise? So, that's a heavy sentiment, Nick. That's a heavy sentiment. So first thing I want to say here is that he says he's the monarch. You should stand firmly in that place. You should stand firmly in that place. If the public wants to divert to the heir, let them. Bring William into the light. Bring him into the light. He is your successor. He should be at your side. He should be presented as a voice in the room. It is not only the voice of the king, but it is the voice of the successor as well. And he says here, the blessing is that we have good sentiment around William. Up here, if he does this, the clouds will part. The clouds are going from dark to clear. We need to have William right next to him. That unity is something that will create a magical change in the public. If the public sees him sharing power, that they will warm up and support the monarchy as it is. So we can go through this evolution and change into a more modern monarchy. Over here, this is definitely for Harry. And sometimes we have to break our own heart. Sometimes we have to do that. And Nicholas has a vested interest in this, because I did talk about his brother Michael when he did marry a divorcee and Nicholas exiled him. That was according to the rules at the time. Does Nicholas regret that, exiling his brother Michael? Does he regret that? It had to be done. Had he not, he would have been better protected inside. Does he think that if Michael had been a consistent member of the imperial family, that it would have solved some issues in terms of the revolution? The revolution was there. The revolution was on its way, and it was determined to be gone. So that, I think, is a fated thing, that we have the imperial family leaving the earth plane. So where does Nicholas see the biggest reputational vulnerability for Charles? Is it policy, Andrew, Harry? Policy, Andrew, Harry. Harry's got it all out on the table. He thinks that Andrew is going to try and sweet talk his way back in there and kind of gloss it over. Charles does have some sweet feelings still toward Andrew. He's not as disgusted with him as Nicholas thinks that he should be. There's he's like, oh, he's a dirty man. That's Nicholas II, dirty man in terms of Andrew. Policy, he thinks that Charles is not wielding the powers that he has enough. He needs to wield them a little bit more. So I think that the policy, if he has a little bit of a stronger rule, then all of this other stuff falls in line. That's how he feels about this particular situation. If he had wielded strength more overtly, that all of these problems would have stayed in line. Certainly Harry, certainly would have stayed in line. Andrew, I think, because they're contemporaries, they're brothers, may have been a little trickier. But let's see. What does Nicholas think will strengthen the trust in Charles? And this is personal, not PR wise, personal. Lean into your bride, lean into her more. There is an objective view that Camilla has that Nicholas really seems to think is valuable, because she's almost like between the cultures. She's between royal, nobility, regular people. Camilla has her ear to the ground. She knows what people are saying out and about. She gets that information fed back to her. And Camilla will be able to tell Charles where the imbalance is, and he can then zero in on it. Don't listen to the courtiers only. Listen to your wife as well. She should be the final word that you hear before you close your eyes at night. So listen to your privy council, listen to your small council, and then when you go to bed, say, what do you think, my dear? Take her information and sleep on it and see what happens, because she has a better vision for how the public is perceiving them. And that is something I think that Nicholas II wishes that he had a better vision. He had a better vision. He wishes for a better vision of the public sentiment. So just to give you a little more history on them, the Russian imperial family, there was an incident prior to the coronation where they were giving out some free gifts and beer to the public. And there was a rumor that spread through the crowd that there wasn't going to be enough of the commemorative mugs, and the crowd pushed and there was a stampede and many, many, many people died. The advisors for Nicholas II and the newly crowned Empress Alex, they had a feast and a dance that night. And the advisors said, oh, it's nothing. Go have a good time. Like, people need to see you dancing. It was roundly criticized by the public because it was seen as very, very insensitive. And Nicholas II and his wife specifically said, we shouldn't do this. We shouldn't be enjoying ourselves and when all of these people are in mourning. And it wasn't until a couple of days later that they went and they looked at the grounds and they actually got the full measure of the story. Their advisors were not giving them the whole story. But in this sense, Empress Alexandra, was very intuitive about it, and she knew that they shouldn't be participating in revelry, that kind of excitement. Also, famously, it was said that the cold meats from Nicholas II's father furnished the wedding table because they got married right after the funeral. It was a few months later, but They had to get married because they had to work on the succession. So, you know what I mean? They had to get busy. So Annabelle showed up again. So Nicholas II says, lean into your wife. She knows what she's talking about. She's got good insight. Listen to her. Make her counsel the most important counsel. So went a little long on that section, but you guys know, if you've been here for a while, I can talk about Russian history all day long. So we're going to jump it on back to locals only. James II of England, 1633 to 1701. He became king in 1685, openly Catholic in a Protestant nation. Suspended Parliament, was ousted in the Glorious Revolution of 1688, fled to France, and Parliament declared he had abdicated. Leadership principle here: ignoring constitutional balance invites removal. James did not formally abdicate. He fled, he ran, he buggered off, and Parliament decided for him. So the theme here is the institution may survive without the ruler, and some bigger institutions may make that decision for you. So James the Second, let's see what he has to say. So, the constant, if you push too far, power shifts. So does James the Second think that Charles has not wielded power enough and runs the risk of political or public cry for him to beat it? Seven of Swords. He's saying there are some creepity creeps that are not showing their full measure here. We've got the Eight of Wands. That means that they're being very, very quiet, and that they may pop up out of a bush or something like that and say, we got to get you out of here. So does James II think that Charles needs to wield more power or more public perception? 10 of Swords, the power thing is over. The public perception, get the people to like you. Get the people to like you. They don't necessarily have to like your choice of bride or your behavior, but you've got to get people to like you. What does James II advise to Charles in regard to Harry and Andrew? Here's Andrew. Actually, I thought Harry. Let me shuffle that again. So let's just give it a shuffle real quick. Advise in terms of Andrew and Harry. Andrew, Harry. So in terms of Andrew, this is kind of interesting. He says, be the king that you are. And stand firm for your bloodline, but understand that the wheels of justice, this wheel of fortune, the wheels of justice are going to override your sovereignty. It's going to override it. With Harry, Harry is always going to be a wild card. He's always going to be wiggly and wild, and there really is no salvaging this. Six of Wands. Really, that parenting aspect is going to be very, very complicated. And Harry is always going to weaken the monarchy for Charles, because he's going to point that he could not manage this one man. How can he manage a nation? That's really some dire information there. Very, very hard words from James II. This is like a get your ducks in a row, buddy, because things are getting wild. Is King Charles pushing the envelope to the point where power is going to shift, according to James. Yep, 9 of Pentacles. And there's our messaging. James II has concerns that so what happens here is the refusal to allow the natural evolution of the royal family, the institution of monarchy in Great Britain. The refusal to allow that evolution and to firmly plant your feet in the past and the rules and regulations of what being royal means. With the way that media is, they're far too exposed at this point, and the information is out there. It's exposed. Hiccup. Sorry. If he refuses to evolve, he may create a happy family, but a frivolous family. And we lose our power. And we are seen as stealing a seat of power from one that could do better. And in that case, we run the risk of usurpers coming in and taking the throne. And his question, James II, Charles III, is, do you want to lose for your entire family? Do you want to lose this? Do you want to be the one that lets it run through your fingers? So some interesting food for thought here. So these rulers did not always fail because they were weak. Some were romantic, idealistic, some were indecisive, some were isolated, and some were misread in the moment. This lesson is not cruelty. The lesson is awareness. And that has to be a round awareness. It's an awareness that goes all through us, above us, below us, in, out, all over. So Charles needs to be aware of the opinion of the public, the opinion of politics, the opinion of the world, and the opinion of his family. And that's a lot. That's a lot to balance. But when we are talking about the pressure of waning power, monarchical power, he really does need to look at the public, and he needs to make sure that his subjects are in alignment with what his messages are. So power today is definitely shaped by public opinion, media velocity, and constitutional boundaries. In episode 3, we are going to consult with some monarchs that endured scandals and terrible things and missteps and crisis and all kinds of stuff like that. But they survived. So let me know what you think about this series. We've got one more episode next week, you'll see. But if you're a member, you're going to be watching them right away because they're going to be available to you as soon as I'm done with them. So I thank you so much for watching and listening and liking and being members and subscribers. I really appreciate it. On the world's biggest streaming platform, I know you have a lot of choices for information that you can watch. And I hope that I am filling your cup with this little historical journey and psychic journey. So I will see you in the next one real soon. Thank you so much and have a great day.